Imagine waking up one morning with the unsettling realization that your life has already happened before, not exactly, but close enough to disturb you. Different years, different people, different settings, yet the same emotional endings, the same arguments wearing new faces, the same ambitions collapsing just before fulfillment, the same promises to yourself. This time will be different, followed by the same quiet disappointment. You try to explain it rationally. You blame timing, other people, circumstances, bad luck, trauma, fate. But somewhere deep inside, a more uncomfortable thought begins to surface. What if the problem isn't outside me at all? Carl Jung believed that most people do not live their lives consciously. They reenact them. And until the unconscious becomes conscious, life does not feel like freedom. It feels like repetition. This is not a motivational idea. It is a psychological diagnosis. Because Jung's most unsettling insight was this: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If that sentence makes you uneasy, it should, because it suggests that your failures may not be random, your suffering may not be accidental, and your repeated mistakes may not be mistakes at all, but messages you've refused to understand. The hidden mechanism, how the unconscious takes control. To understand why you keep repeating the same mistakes, you must first abandon a comforting illusion, the belief that you are fully in control of your choices. Modern psychology flatters the ego. It tells you that awareness equals power, that insight automatically leads to change. Jung knew better. He understood that awareness is rare and that most human behavior is driven by forces beneath conscious perception. The unconscious is not a passive storage space. It is active, strategic, purposeful, and when ignored, it does not disappear, it compensates. Jung called this process psychic compensation, the mind's way of restoring balance when consciousness refuses to acknowledge something essential. What does that mean in practice? It means whatever you repress does not vanish. It reorganizes your life from the shadows. Unexpressed anger becomes passive aggression. Denied fear becomes control. Unacknowledged insecurity becomes superiority. Rejected vulnerability becomes addiction, obsession, or emotional numbness. And the most dangerous repression of all is the repression of responsibility for one's inner life. Because when you do not confront what is unconscious, it projects itself onto the world. You don't see your own patterns. You see toxic people. You don't recognize your avoidance. You experience bad luck. Jung called this projection, the psyche's way of avoiding self-recognition by externalizing inner conflicts. And projection is the engine of repetition. You don't leave a failed relationship pattern. You carry it into the next one. You don't escape self-sabotage. You refine it. You don't outgrow your wounds. You recreate them, hoping this time they'll heal you instead of hurt you, but they won't, because the unconscious does not want comfort. It wants integration. The shadow, the part of you you keep running from. At the center of Jung's psychology lies one concept most people misunderstand or fear: the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not immorality. It is simply everything you refuse to become aware of. Every trait you were told was unacceptable. Every impulse you learned to suppress. Every emotion you were punished for expressing. Over time, these rejected aspects do not disappear. They form a parallel personality within you. A silent one, a patient one, and it waits. The shadow expresses itself indirectly, through habits, compulsions, emotional reactions, and yes, repeated mistakes. If you were taught that anger was dangerous, your shadow becomes aggressive in subtle ways. If you were taught that neediness was shameful, your shadow becomes emotionally manipulative. If you were taught that vulnerability is weakness, your shadow seeks control at all costs. Jung warned that what you deny in yourself will eventually control you. This is why people swear they'll never become like their parents, and then wake up one day realizing they already have. This is why people leave toxic environments only to recreate them elsewhere. This is why insight alone doesn't save you, because the shadow does not respond to logic, it responds to attention. Ignored, it sabotages. Acknowledged, it transforms. But most people never acknowledge it. They moralize instead. They judge instead. They rationalize instead. And so the cycle continues. Why the psyche repeats what hurts? Here is the paradox Jung identified, one that most people resist. The psyche repeats pain not because it enjoys suffering, but because it seeks resolution. Unresolved experiences do not remain in the past. They become unfinished psychological business. The unconscious does not operate on time. It operates on meaning. So when something essential is left unintegrated, a betrayal, a humiliation, a loss of identity, the psyche recreates similar conditions in an unconscious attempt to complete the experience. This is why trauma survivors unconsciously return to familiar pain, not because they want it, but because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. The nervous system prefers the known, even when the known is destructive. Jung saw this as a symbolic process, the psyche creating scenarios where consciousness is forced to confront what it avoided. But consciousness usually refuses. Instead of asking, "Why does this keep happening?" it asks, "Why does this always happen to me?" That shift from inquiry to victimhood is where repetition solidifies, because as long as fate is blamed, responsibility is avoided. And as long as responsibility is avoided, the unconscious remains in control. The ego's greatest illusion, the ego, your sense of I, desperately wants to believe it is sovereign. It tells itself stories of autonomy, rationality, independence. But Jung shattered this illusion. He argued that the ego is a small island in a vast psychological ocean, and most of what governs your behavior, desires, fears, attractions, aversions, originates outside conscious awareness. The ego's primary defense is identification. It says, "This is who I am." And in doing so, it unconsciously rejects everything that contradicts that image. If you identify as strong, you repress weakness. If you identify as good, you repress cruelty. If you identify as independent, you repress dependency. And whatever is repressed becomes autonomous. Jung called these autonomous contents complexes, emotionally charged clusters of unconscious material that hijack behavior. When a complex is triggered, you are no longer choosing. You are reacting, and afterward the ego rationalizes. This is how people repeat mistakes while believing they are acting freely, because freedom without self-knowledge is an illusion. Modern life and the acceleration of unconsciousness. Jung warned that technological and social progress does not guarantee psychological maturity. In fact, it often produces the opposite. Modern life rewards distraction, speed, surface-level identity. There is little space for introspection and no incentive for self-confrontation. So the unconscious grows stronger. Social media becomes a mirror of projection. Work becomes an arena for unintegrated ambition. Relationships become battlegrounds for unresolved attachment wounds. And the more external stimulation increases, the less tolerance people have for inner discomfort. Instead of reflection, there is consumption. Instead of meaning, there is noise. Jung feared that a society disconnected from its unconscious would not become enlightened, but possessed. Possessed by ideology, possessed by fear, possessed by collective shadow. And on the individual level, possession looks like this. You don't know why you react the way you do. You don't understand why you sabotage what you want. You feel trapped in cycles. You swear you'll escape tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes, because the unconscious does not negotiate. It demands recognition, the turning point, making the unconscious conscious. So how does the cycle break? Not through positivity, not through willpower, not through pretending you are already healed. Jung was explicit. What you resist persists. What you confront transforms. Making the unconscious conscious is not an intellectual exercise. It is a psychological confrontation. It requires you to observe your patterns without moral judgment. Not asking, "Why am I like this?" but asking, "What part of me needs to be seen?" Every repeated mistake contains information. Every emotional overreaction reveals a hidden wound. Every destructive habit serves a psychological function. The goal is not elimination, it is integration, because the shadow does not need to be destroyed. It needs to be made conscious, and when it is, something extraordinary happens. Energy previously locked in repression becomes available for growth. What once controlled you becomes something you can relate to. This is individuation. The process Jung believed was the true aim of human life, not happiness, not success, but wholeness, the ultimate realization. Here is the truth most people never reach. Your repeated mistakes are not evidence of failure. They are evidence of unfinished self-knowledge. Life repeats itself until you understand what it is trying to teach, not intellectually, but existentially. And the moment you stop asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" and start asking, "What in me is asking to be recognized?" the repetition loses its power. Not instantly, not comfortably, but permanently. Because fate only feels inevitable when it is unconscious. If something in this disturbed you, if you recognized your own patterns in these words, don't ignore that feeling. That discomfort is awareness, trying to emerge. If you want to continue this kind of psychological excavation, if you want to understand the unconscious forces shaping your life, rather than being ruled by them, stay here. And before you move on, sit with one question, honestly, without excuses. What pattern in my life keeps repeating? And what part of me have I refused to see? Because the moment you stop calling it fate is the moment your life finally begins to change,